Me? I'm a farmer's son. My childhood was blessed. There was the smell of the earth, the sounds of birds and wind, and the sense of connection with the sky, the clouds, and the stories they told as they passed. Of course, all that passed away. But late in life, though I was no longer on the land, I was invited back into that world. My re-entry into this world happened like this. I was living in a forest on an island off the coast of British Columbia. A friend came from Asia to rest from his work at a garden for children traumatized by an endless civil war. He invited me to learn a new practice of his. Its aim was to enable the adults at the garden to care as much as children do about their stories, paintings, songs. We sat on the floor of my barn, closed our eyes, and painted black lines in time with our outgoing breath. Then, with our eyes open, we cleaned those lines with white paint. We looked into the tangles of our lines. Sooner or later, my friend assured me, images and stories would disclose themselves just as they do for children lying on the grass and gazing into the clouds. Then all we had to do was white out lines that weren't part of the story and color the forms we had liberated. I was a dull student. After 2 days of painting, I had whited out all but a single line. I felt really desperate about this. The morning of the third day, I told my friend I was giving up. I would go into town and meet some folks who had invited me to join a tap dancing class. My friend laughed, but said to go back into the barn, meditate, and lay down some fresh breath lines onto my poor canvas. So I did, and when I opened my eyes, saw before me the unmistakable outline of two seals and a goose in an Arctic pond. I never learned to tap dance, but I haven't stopped painting since that wonderful day in the spring of 1997. From the beginning, I wished to share the practice with all and sundry. There have been no joys in my life quite like the delight my painting companions have taken in their discoveries of leaping whales, birds, serene and perplexed, the endless variations of Madonnas, children, Buddhas, elephants, warriors and saints, rainbows, flowers. The stories we see in the passing clouds are tales written in our own hearts. My mother, who died in 1993, reappeared in one of my early paintings as an elephant, sitting with one foot pushed through the top of a fine old hat. Our paintings are like moments in a dream. We don't get to choose our dreams. They can be funny, sad, terrifying, erotic, chaotic, lyric, even poetic. What comes before our dream moments? What comes after? These are the questions I ask my students to pose. My first teaching studio in Toronto was called the Stupid School. As I see it, we're altogether too loyal to the idea of being smart, of wishing to distinguish ourselves from our fellows. My way is to let go of all that. My lines are blind. Truth is disclosed. Its opposite is the not yet disclosed. Forget about being right. Forget about error. There are three-legged elephants, purple cows, dancing porpoises. Ask any child. My friend from the Butterfly Peace Garden in Sri Lanka says that when adults paint like this with children, they validate the children's discovery of their innermost selves. This enables the children, many of them there cast off, hollowed out by grief, damaged in body and mind, to brace themselves. When we paint like this, we are making an offering to ourselves. We don't sell our paintings. We don't trade them. They're holy in a way, outside the usual world of getting and spending. I paid a visit to the garden a year or so after setting up the Stupid School. The men and women who worked there were a courageous lot, incredibly sincere. We sat in a grass-thatched gazebo and spoke of painting. I asked how they felt when something went wrong. When a cat walked over a wet canvas, for instance, or when someone spilled a big blob of paint on someone else's work. Catastrophe, one of them said. But I think accidents show the way, enable us to let go of obsessions. When people think their painting has disclosed itself, they can become fearfully attached to their interpretation of it. There is a tradition in temple building that when the work has been completed to near perfection, the master builder arrives to insert the final brick, which he does crookedly. That's how the light gets in, as Leonard Cohen says. There's a big boat in the garden. It's a feature of most of the outdoor operas the kids put on there every few months. I was standing to one side of the boat, the gunnels of which were several feet above me. A boy up there dropped a steel pail onto my head. There was a hole in the bucket, the result of a bullet fired by some soldier into the garden, in the hope, I suppose, of winging an insurgent. The bucket reappeared a couple of years later in a painting I call A Prayer for Don Quixote. I gave the painting to a friend. I used to think I was a kind of Sancho Panchas to his Don. The government has thrown him out of the country, presumably because creative play at the garden is thought to be subversive. A Toronto friend of mine has set up a foundation to help people at a crossroads in their lives to participate in a community of similarly perplexed individuals. One of the foundation's projects is a house where I taught for several years. One of my students was an 80-year-old woman who exhibited more energy and compassion than anyone I've ever met. Her first painting was of a woman holding what I thought at first was an infant. It turned out to be a clock. Another student there was a Dene artist who invited me to a northern reserve where his brother and his brother's wife operated a school dedicated to reclaiming disaffected youth in the region. Thus I went up to the parkland in Saskatchewan, not far north of the farm on which I'd grown up. The school was located at one end of Lac La Plonge. A Cree teacher there took me on a canoe trip down the Waterhen River. While we were on the water, he shot a moose. We dressed it on the muddy shore of the river. Nothing was wasted. When he was done with his knife, the teacher carried the animal's lungs into the forest to leave as an offering to the land. Not surprisingly, the experience sparked a painting. An elderly Cree woman whose two daughters had succumbed to cancer brought her granddaughter from nearby Lac La Ronge up to La Planche. The granddaughter and I whistled our breath as we painted. Her grandmother and a friend built a sweat lodge. I panicked in the dark and heat, but the old woman talked me down and somehow I survived the ordeal. When I came out of the lodge, I prostrated myself before the woman, who was sitting on a log beside the fire in which they heat the big stones that represent the ancestor, grandfathers, and grandmothers. The woman placed her hand on my head. I looked up, and she was removing the wrapping from the cigar I had brought as a tobacco offering. Slowly she placed the cigar between her lips. Slowly she lit it. Then she blew a big cloud of smoke into my face. The Dene artist who had invited me up there produced a wonderful painting of that sweat lodge experience. For a while, my studio was on the ground floor of an elementary school in Toronto. The children there said it smelled of peace. One day I invited some teachers who had come to paint to join me in an ancient Buddhist prayer called the Loving Kindness Meditation. The prayer asks for happiness, freedom from suffering in mind, body, and spirit, peace in the heart, freedom. Many of the teachers were reluctant to participate. That's how I came to understand that although we live in a time of self-obsession, precious few of us actually love ourselves and wish ourselves well. Since then, I've emphasized the notion that Breathlines paintings are offerings to oneself, perhaps to others.